Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. I am Smriti Rastogi. For nearly 7 decades, India has played a significant role in assisting the United Nations in maintaining global peace. Starting with the UN operation in Korea in 1950, India has contributed more peacekeepers than any other country. More than 2 lakh Indians have served in 49 of the 71 UN peacekeeping missions till date. The commitment of the Indian peacekeepers have been recognized the world over, proof of which are the numerous awards that they have received for their outstanding work. This week, nearly 850 Indian peacekeepers serving in South Sudan were awarded the prestigious UN medal for their efforts in building peace in the strife-torn nation as well as in supporting the local communities. Currently, over 2,300 Indian troops and 25 police personnel are deployed with the UN mission in South Sudan. Today in In-Depth, we will be discussing India in the role of global peacekeeper, what has been its record, the sacrifices it has entailed, and the history itself of global peacekeeping. Nearly 850 Indian peacekeepers have been awarded the prestigious UN medal for their contribution to promoting peace in South Sudan. Currently, there are 2,342 Indian troops and 25 police personnel with the UN mission in South Sudan. Let us take a look at their efforts in this trouble-torn country. Nearly 850 Indian peacekeepers serving in South Sudan have been awarded the prestigious UN medal for their role in building peace in the strife-torn nation. They have received honor for giving above and beyond their duties to support local communities.
This particular operation for which they have been rewarded is an operation in South Sudan. South Sudan, as you know, is a new republic. It was formed in 2011. And the UN was very closely involved in its creation as a new republic. And soon after that, because of internal difficulties, it requested for UN peacekeepers, and UN peacekeepers were sent. India is the second largest contributor to this particular mission. It's called UNMISS, the UN mission in South Sudan.
Indian troops have been praised for their efforts to support peace talks between the government and the opposition forces, especially in the Upper Nile region, and establishing the first ever UNMISS base on the west bank of the Nile at Kodok. Further, they also supported local communities for building veterinary hospitals at Kodak and Malakal, training cattle keepers for better care for their livestock, and providing life-saving medical assistance to people, and providing value addition training for farmers.
This particular citation which they got, they have been not only praised for keeping the peace, but for helping the local community. So in this particular base, and they have established on the west bank of the Nile, they have not only done peacekeeping, they have also assisted locals by setting up a veterinary hospital, by training the locals to how to raise cattle, how to take care of the livestock, and they've also had medical camps for the locals. So all this combined, so it is not just a function of not letting people fight each other, but also in helping the locals, which have distinguished themselves with this medal.
Last month, 323 Indian peacekeepers serving as engineers and medical staff in South Sudan were also honored with UN medal for their distinguished service. Engineering troops from India serving in South Sudan perform a variety of duties that help the local communities. They're rehabilitating a 167-kilometer of road from Malakal to Palok that will later be extended to Ring. Once the repairs are finished, the road will facilitate the peacekeeping operations, humanitarian access and trade. In September, 17 Indian peacekeepers deployed with the UN mission in South Sudan were awarded the medal in recognition for their service to the people. Further, 150 Indian peacekeepers serving with the UNMISS received medals of honor for their dedicated service in April 2019. India is the second largest contributor of peacekeepers to the UN mission. Currently, 2,342 Indian troops and 25 police personnel are deployed with the UN mission in South Sudan. More than 2 lakh military and police have served over the past 70 years, and 168 Indian military personnel have lost their lives under the UN flag. With inputs from Vipul Agrawal, Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. Post-independence, Indian policymakers were faced with a question as to what should be India's role in world politics. As a large nation, India had its own huge internal security concerns. But in 1948, when the question turned to forming a global peacekeeping force, India became an active supporter. It was one of the original members of the United Nations, taking part in its operations all across the world in various capacities.
Ever since 1950, India has demonstrated a solid commitment to the efforts of the United Nations in maintaining global peace and security. Starting with its participation in the UN operation in Korea in 1950, India has contributed more personnel than any other country. More than 2 lakh Indians have served in 49 of the 71 UN peacekeeping missions till date. The first all-women peacekeeping contingent from India was deployed in 2007 to the UN operation in Liberia in the wake of the country's brutal civil war. India was also one of the first countries to send its peacekeeping troops to Congo in 1960. Till date, 68 Indian soldiers have lost their lives in the line of duty in Congo.
India, as you know, is aspiring for a permanent seat in the Security Council. And for the Security Council, peacekeeping operations are the most important work that they do for fulfilling their responsibility to maintain international peace and security. And in this, India's contribution is appreciated all over, not only in the UN, but by other countries as well, especially the countries in which these peacekeeping operations are taking place. Indian troops, as you know, have great experience in working in multicultural environments because of the experience back home in India itself. So they are able to move into these areas and get into both peacekeeping and developmental work very smoothly because of their experience back home. And when they come back, they bring their experiences from abroad back to our country, which enriches our army personnel.
India is currently the 4th largest contributor of military and police personnel to UN peacekeeping efforts. There are around 6,700 uniformed peacekeepers from India, with nearly 80% in Congo and South Sudan. India has also provided 15 force commanders to various missions and was the first country to contribute to the Trust Fund on Sexual Exploitation and Abuse that was set up in 2016. But India's long-standing service has not come without cost. According to the UN, 164 Indian peacekeepers lost their lives while serving with the United Nations.
There are three types of peacekeeping that India has done. One is UN peacekeeping, and right now we have over 6,000 Indian soldiers doing peacekeeping missions in different parts, and they have distinguished themselves everywhere. In fact, in the past, I think 5 years, 10 of them have also died in action, and there have been cases where they've given medals, and they have been appreciated by the local population. The other type of peacekeeping is the kind of peacekeeping we did in Sri Lanka, which is unilateral, one-sided. So Indian peacekeeping mission in Sri Lanka. Third we do is on the seas. So we have 2 ships or sometimes 1 ship in the Gulf of Aden, in which they ensure that piracy is curbed. So in all 3 things, our Indian soldiers have distinguished themselves with action which has been appreciated, which has been seen as not being excessive, and which is basically resulted in Indian peacekeepers being in quite a high demand across the world.
UN peacekeepers are often referred to as blue helmets because of their headgear. Peacekeeping forces include soldiers, police officers and civilian personnel. They can be deployed both to implement and monitor peacekeeping agreements. They undertake a wide spectrum of other activities like assistance after a natural disaster, overseeing power sharing agreements, electoral oversight, and economic and social development.
India, basically, when they get a request from the UN to send peacekeepers, they do a selection process. And the best and the most elite army units are put to a test, and only the best performing units which have showcased their prowess in conflict areas, they are chosen. So we have seen over the years many peacekeepers go there, but always the best of each units are selected based on the performance on India, where they're performing in Kashmir, in J&K, in Northeast, depending on their performances there.
The peacekeeping missions have multiplied since the end of the Cold War, but the number of willing and able troop contributors remains scarce. While Indian participation in UN peacekeeping has increased over the years, despite growing demands, Western troop contributions have fallen to below 2% of the total deployed forces, compared to 25% during the Cold War. Recently, India voiced serious concern on compromises being made in peacekeeping operational issues to reduce costs. India also sought an enhanced role for countries contributing troops in the decision-making process of UN peacekeeping missions. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And with that, we'll slip into a very quick break. Stay with us.
Rabindranath Tagore was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1913 for his book Gitanjali. In 1950, he composed the music and lyrics for India's national anthem, Jana Gana Mana. And when Bangladesh became independent in 1971, they chose Tagore's song, Amar Shonar Bangla, as its national anthem. Tagore's life and works have made him a cultural icon, studied the world over, even into the 21st century.
Welcome back after the break. At a time when the Cold War rivalries paralyzed the UN Security Council in the 60s, peacekeeping became the most important tool available with the United Nations to maintain peace in the conflict areas. The United Nations peacekeeping is guided by 4 basic principles: consent of parties, impartiality, non-use of force except in self-defense, and defense of the mandate. Based on these principles, there have been more than 70 peacekeeping missions in the last 70 years, some performing adequately while others fail to protect civilians. In this report, we talk about these successes and failures.
The United Nations peacekeeping operations began in 1948 during the Arab-Israeli War. Ever since, the light blue helmets and berets have been deployed to many of the world's troubled spots, operating in the most dangerous and difficult environments, dealing with conflicts or their aftermath. The earliest armed peacekeeping operation was the first UN emergency force deployed during the Suez Crisis in 1956. The first large-scale mission, having nearly 20,000 military personnel, was the UN operation in Congo, launched in 1960. Since then, the UN has deployed more than 70 peacekeeping operations. It has helped end conflicts and foster reconciliation by conducting successful peacekeeping operations in dozens of countries, including Cambodia, El Salvador, Guatemala, Mozambique, Namibia, and Tajikistan. Over the years, hundreds of thousands of military personnel, as well as tens of thousands of UN police and other civilians from more than 120 countries have participated in UN peacekeeping operations. Bangladesh, Ethiopia, India, Pakistan and Rwanda contribute the largest number of peacekeepers, having a share of 36% of the UN's force. Among the most notable successes of UN peacekeeping missions has been the establishment of peace worldwide. Due to its conflict resolution and peacekeeping initiatives, the number of people dying in conflicts has declined rapidly since 1945 worldwide. The UN peacekeeping force that operated in Sierra Leone from 1999 to 2005 is also hailed as a success. It was created to help implement a peace agreement after the country's devastating civil war. The United Nations destroyed more than 42,000 weapons and 1.2 million rounds of ammunition and disarmed more than 75,000 ex-fighters, including hundreds of child soldiers. Burundi is also cited as a success story for the UN peacekeeping operation, helping it recover from decades of ethnic conflict. But there have also been some notable failures. The UN peacekeeping organization was criticized for not doing enough to prevent the 1994 Rwandan genocide that left up to 1 million people dead. A 1999 inquiry found that the United Nations ignored evidence that the genocide was planned and refused to act once it had started. More than 2,500 UN peacekeepers were withdrawn after the murder of 10 Belgian soldiers. The UN was accused of leaving Rwanda to its fate. On 11 July 1995, towards the end of Bosnia's 1992-95 war, Bosnian Serb forces swept into the eastern Srebrenica enclave and executed 8,000 Muslim men and boys in the days that followed, dumping their bodies into pits. It was the worst massacre in post-Second World War European history. The UN had previously declared the town a safe area to be free from any armed attack or any other hostile act. 6,000 Dutch infantry was supposed to be protecting thousands of civilians who had taken refuge from earlier Serb offensives in northeastern Bosnia. As Serb forces began shelling Srebrenica, Bosnian Muslim fighters in the town asked for the return of weapons they had surrendered to the UN peacekeepers, but their request was refused. The Dutch peacekeepers were obliged to watch even as the killings began. UN peacekeepers were also accused of paying women and young girls they were supposed to be protecting for sex and sometimes raping them in the Democratic Republic of Congo in early 2005. Subsequent reports found there had been similar allegations in countries ranging from Cambodia to Bosnia to Haiti.
When the security forces perform in these places, they have to be very cognizant of the human rights of the people around. And even in the most difficult situations, they have to respect human rights. Besides, since they are working in a foreign environment, they have to respect the local culture. There are different kinds of societies they work in. Our soldiers come from their own social background, but because of the fact that they work in multicultural environments, the UN ensures that they respect the local culture. They do not antagonize the local people. They are not conquerors over there. They are there to help the local people. And as I said, even in conflict situations where, as for example, recently in Congo, the UN peacekeepers themselves came under attack because the local people were unhappy with the fact that some guerrilla groups were attacking them. And the UN peacekeepers, because of their mandate, were not in a position to protect them there.
These setbacks provided important lessons for UN peacekeeping as a tool to restore and maintain international peace and security. The United Nations is now undertaking a major exercise to introduce reforms in peacekeeping operations. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
The United Nations peacekeeping forces have resolved many global disputes and restored peace in conflict-hit regions. The peacekeeping forces have played a crucial role, especially in the flare-ups between Israel and the Arabs, and also North and South Korea after the Korean War ended. Here's a look at the history of the peacekeeping forces.
The United Nations Charter makes the Security Council responsible for maintaining international peace and security. It also seeks collective measures to prevent and remove threats to peace. The United Nations peacekeeping forces were formed to do this task of maintaining peace in armed conflict. Mandated by the Security Council, the UN peacekeeping forces are authorized to engage in conflicts between states and countries torn by civil strife. However, restoring peace in a conflict zone takes place only after both warring sides agree to it.
Peacekeeping is one of the most important functions of the United Nations. Peacekeeping is an important element of the work that the UN does in maintaining international peace and security. There are over 100,000 UN peacekeepers around the world in 14 peacekeeping missions. Now, UN peacekeepers have two functions to perform. One is to maintain the peace that has been negotiated earlier by UN good officers, and to ensure that the various parties involved in the conflict do not respect the ceasefire and do not fight with each other.
Operations of the UN peacekeeping force fall within the purview of the Secretary General of the United Nations and the Secretariat. The United Nations operates peacekeeping forces in two ways. The first is to deploy unarmed or lightly armed military personnel from a number of countries. These forces are sent to areas where the warring parties need a neutral party to observe the peace process. Armed troops of the peacekeeping forces are also deployed in conflict zones. Their role is to maintain peace in the conflict-torn regions.
UN peacekeeping is very, very strict. So it is difficult sometimes to control situations. For example, in some locations where they're sent, they're not allowed to fire weapons. So when you're not allowed to fire weapons, but still control the situation, it becomes very difficult to operate. The other issues they face is that most of these peacekeeping bases are very isolated. They are in different parts, and they don't have that entire backup that you have back in India. In the sense, you don't have reserve units, you don't have air support necessarily at all times. The third biggest difficulty is you have to work with different nations. There have been cases in the past, for example, where Indian army troops have been deployed right next to Bangladesh, Pakistan, and China, and they have all had to work together. So you have to overcome language barriers, you have to overcome difficulties in having different types of equipment, and also sometimes personality and personal issues can come into play.
United Nations Peacekeeping Force was established in 1948. In its first mission, the United Nations Truce Supervision Organization was sent to the newly created State of Israel to supervise ceasefire between the Israelis and the Arab states. The United Nations Emergency Force was sent to the Suez Crisis in 1956 or the Second Arab-Israeli War. At the end of the Korean War, the UN forces remained along the south side of a demilitarized zone until 1967, when American and South Korean forces took over. In 1974, the United Nations deployed United Nations Disengagement Observer Force at the Golan Heights to supervise the agreed disengagement of the Israeli and Syrian forces. In 1978, after Israel's attack on Lebanon, the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, or UNIFIL, was established to confirm Israeli withdrawal from Lebanon and restore international peace and security. UN peacekeeping forces also played an important role in Congo's struggle for independence in 1960. 20,000 peacekeeping troops were deployed in this area to restore peace in the war zone. Other than restoring peace, the peacekeeping forces also monitor disputed international borders. Since its formation in 1948, the UN peacekeeping forces have successfully brought peace to regions hit by conflict and violence. But in the process, hundreds of soldiers have lost their lives in these peacekeeping operations. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha Television.
And that's all we have for you in this edition of In Depth. We will be back same time tomorrow with a focus on another key subject. You can also watch our program online on YouTube. Suggestions and feedback about the program are welcome. Thank you for watching.
On how many occasions